You are listening to the Pregnancy Podcast with Vanessa Merton. Hello. Thank you for tuning into the Pregnancy Podcast. In today's episode, we're talking about how to increase your milk supply and how to keep it up. Milk supply is the number one reason that moms stop breastfeeding early or reach for formula. The good news is that most of what actually protects and builds your milk supply comes down to a few simple things you can control. In this episode, I will break down how milk production actually works, how to gauge your supply accurately, and why so many mothers worry that they're not making enough when they truly are. You're going to learn practical ways to establish breastfeeding in the first few days and weeks, and find out how to increase your supply if you need to. I'll also dig into evidence on galactagogues. Those are foods, herbs, and medications that boost your supply so that you know what the research really says. Plus, I'll cover oversupply and the substances that can decrease how much milk you make if you end up in that situation. You can find the full article and all of the resources for this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/milk supply. There's so much to learn about before your baby arrives, and it helps to have solid evidence-based information in one place. Join Pregnancy Podcast Premium to get access to hundreds of episodes with evidence-based information that you won't find anywhere else. As a Pregnancy Podcast Premium member, you get access to the private podcast feed that is ad-free and available in your favorite podcast app. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/premium. VTech is the number one baby monitor brand in North America and trusted by millions of families. The VM5266 baby monitor has a 5-inch color screen. You can pan, tilt, and zoom from the parent unit, and sound-activated soothing that turns on when your baby stirs. It's available at Target. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/VTech. From skincare to treating common pregnancy symptoms like stretch marks with clinically proven ingredients, 8 Sheep Organics has you covered. Every product comes with a 100-day happiness guarantee. Try it risk-free. If you're not 100% happy with your purchase, simply send them an email and they'll get you a refund, no questions asked. Check out 8 Sheep Organics and save 10% when you go to pregnancypodcast.com/8sheep. To start off, major health organizations largely agree on how long you should breastfeed. The World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and pediatric associations around the world recommend exclusive breastfeeding for about the first 6 months. After that, you should introduce solid foods and continue breastfeeding for up to 2 years or beyond. I know 2 years may sound like a very long time, and you just need to know that any amount of time that your baby receives breast milk is beneficial. In the real world, far fewer mothers are reaching these goals. According to the most recent CDC data, about 85.7% start out breastfeeding, but only about 28% were still exclusively breastfed at 6 months. And that number continues to drop as babies get older. The top reason that mothers stop breastfeeding is a belief that they're not making enough milk. How common is true low milk supply? True physiological low milk supply is actually rare. The research shows that only about 5% of mothers experience actual milk insufficiency due to a pathological or anatomical reason. That means that the vast majority of mothers can produce plenty of milk for their babies. But that ability depends on establishing breastfeeding well, especially in that first month. When a mother's supply falls short, it's usually because milk was not removed frequently or effectively, not because their body cannot make enough. This is good news because it means that supply is something that you can usually protect and build. Let's talk about how milk production works. During pregnancy, your body starts producing colostrum. This is your first milk. It's packed with immune factors, protein, sugar, fats, along with agents that help to seal, protect, and repair your baby's intestines. Your baby's stomach at birth is tiny. It's about the size of a marble. So on the first day, they're only going to take in about an ounce of colostrum, and that's spread across several feedings. Around day 3 or 4, your milk comes in, and then your baby gradually increases how much they drink over the first month. From roughly 1 to 6 months, the amount that your baby consumes stays fairly consistent right up until you start introducing solid foods. The single most important principle to understand is the amount of milk that your body makes depends on how much milk you remove. This is the supply and demand system. The more milk that leaves your breasts, the more your body produces. This principle is the cornerstone of breastfeeding, and nearly everything that we talk about in this episode builds on that. So to start, you need to establish your supply in those first few weeks. The first 2 to 3 weeks after birth are really important for setting up a strong milk supply. When you are frequently nursing during this window, you're signaling to your body to keep producing milk. The number one thing that you can do is feed your baby often. You can expect to breastfeed somewhere between 8 and 12 or more times over a 24-hour period. You really cannot nurse too often, and frequent feedings are critical to building supply. You may also consider pumping, although a breast pump is generally not as efficient at removing milk as your baby is. You also need to know that each breast makes milk based on how much is removed from that side. So you want to be using both breasts throughout the day. You don't need to obsess over splitting time evenly between your left side and your right side. If one side's sore and needs a break, if your baby's ready to switch, if your arm's tired and you're ready to switch, then just move to the other breast. The point is that you don't want to consistently favor one side over the other. Your baby is also going to go through growth spurts, and they're going to do cluster feeding. That's nursing more often for a stretch of time. This is not a sign that your supply is failing. It may seem like your baby's eating nonstop when this happens. It's really your baby essentially placing an order for more milk, which tells your body to ramp up production to meet that new demand. Remember, this demand and supply loop is your first line of defense. You can also use this purposefully to increase your supply. If you're pumping more often, your body will be producing more milk. In cases when a mom feels like her supply is low, of course, she's going to start supplementing with formula. And that feels very logical, but it can also work against you. If you replace a breastfeeding session with formula, you're removing less milk from your breasts, and your body, in turn, will make less milk. Supplementing is not a problem if that's your goal or if you're moving towards formula. And some mothers do need to supplement, especially if their baby is truly not getting enough milk. That's a completely valid and sometimes a very necessary choice. But if your goal is to exclusively breastfeed or to increase your supply, unnecessary supplementing can really derail your plans. And if you're not sure, working with a lactation consultant can really help you sort out what's actually happening and what to do about it. Let's talk about how to actually gauge your milk supply. One of the trickiest parts of breastfeeding is that you can't see how many ounces your baby is getting. And that uncertainty is exactly what fuels moms worrying that they're not giving their baby enough. But there are good ways to reliably check whether your baby is getting enough milk. None of these require measuring ounces. The best overall measure is your baby's weight gain and their diaper output. Your pediatrician will be weighing your baby at every visit. Those are pretty frequent in the first few months. Babies do naturally tend to lose some weight after birth. So in general, your pediatrician doesn't want to see your baby lose more than about 10% of their birth weight, and then they want to see them back at their birth weight within about 2 weeks. There's one important caveat to this that you need to know about IV fluids during labor. IV fluids can actually leave your baby carrying extra fluid at birth, which they end up shedding in the days after. When that happens, your doctor may read that fluid loss as weight loss from not eating enough. IV fluids are very common, especially in a hospital setting. If you have Pitocin or an epidural, which of course are very common. One study found that newborns whose mothers received more fluid during labor lost significantly more weight in the first days. And that extra loss reflected the baby flushing out fluid rather than not eating enough. So keep this in mind if you have IV fluids during your labor. What comes out of your baby is a really great clue to what's going in. So let's talk about diaper output. In the first 24 hours, you will mostly see meconium. This is a thick, tar-like black poop. Over the next day or two, those stools will transition from that dark color towards green, and then eventually they will go to brown as your milk comes in. By around day 5, stools typically turn yellow. That becomes the norm going forward. If you are formula feeding or combination feeding, yellow or tan or brown stools are normal, though they tend to be a little bit firmer than the stools of an exclusively breastfed baby. You also want to pay attention to wet diapers. According to La Leche League, by day 2, you're looking for at least 2 wet diapers over 24 hours. On days 3 and 4, you should look for 3 or more. By 5 days old, you should see 6 or more wet diapers over 24 hours. Steady, wet diapers, dirty diapers, along with good weight gain are very strong indicators that your baby is getting enough milk. Another option is test weighing, and this is where you actually weigh your baby right before and after a feeding to estimate how much milk they took in. Research shows that test weighing can actually boost a mother's breastfeeding confidence, which in turn shapes how she perceives her supply. You would have access to an accurate scale at your pediatrician's office, or perhaps if you are attending a breastfeeding support group. Most home scales, if you just have one that you step on, are not precise enough for this because you really need one that reads weight in grams. There are scales that you can buy for home use, but weighing before and after every feed can really add stress rather than take it away. So if you're considering this and you're concerned about your baby getting enough milk, you want to do test weighing before and after feeds, talk to a lactation consultant so that you're using it in a way that's helpful rather than a way that's going to create more anxiety. There is an important difference between actually making too little milk and believing that you are. Researchers refer to perceived insufficient milk supply, and this drives a huge share of early weaning. If a mother thinks that she's not producing enough milk, of course, she will often supplement or switch to formula, even when her supply is fine. Keep in mind, until your baby's first birthday, breast milk or formula is their primary source of nutrition. So in that first year, if you cut back on breastfeeding, you have to make up the difference with formula. A systematic review and meta-analysis found that roughly 50% of mothers named perceived insufficient milk supply as their reason for stopping breastfeeding. Across studies from all over the world, the incidence of perceived insufficient milk supply ranged from about 10 to 25%. Now remember, only about 5% of mothers have a true physiological reason that they cannot make enough milk. So how do you tell the difference? Genuine low supply tends to show up as poor weight gain, too few wet and dirty diapers, or signs that your baby is not satisfied after feeding, despite you frequently and effectively nursing. A baby that's not getting enough may seem persistently fussy or unsettled right after a feed. They may stay latched for very long stretches without seeming content, or feed almost constantly, yet never seem satisfied. If you're seeing those signs, that's your cue to reach out to your pediatrician or to a lactation consultant. On the other hand, if your baby is gaining well, if they're filling diapers, your supply is likely fine, even on days when it doesn't feel that way. Remember, there will be times, especially when your baby's going through a growth spurt, that they want to eat more often. And with time, you will learn to recognize those spurts for what they are, rather than reading into them as a supply problem. Your confidence plays a bigger role than you might expect when it comes to breastfeeding. Studies show that several factors shape how you perceive supply, and one of the biggest is breastfeeding self-efficacy. That's simply your confidence in your ability to feed your baby. In fact, you are 7 times more likely to perceive insufficient milk supply if you lack breastfeeding knowledge. The best way to build your confidence is to educate yourself before your baby arrives. You're off to a great start by listening to this episode. There are some excellent resources that I recommend. First, you can see all of the Pregnancy Podcast breastfeeding episodes and resources at pregnancypodcast.com/breastfeeding. One of the books that I recommend most often is The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding. This is a very thorough book that you can lean on as a reference throughout your breastfeeding journey. Also, the Kelly Mom blog is an outstanding online resource. They have detailed articles on nearly every question that could come up with breastfeeding. Next, we're going to talk about steps you can actually take to increase your supply, and we'll cover galactagogues and all the foods, herbs, and supplements that can increase supply and get into the evidence on those. Before we do that, I would like to thank the sponsors that have supported this episode. A lot of companies have exclusive discounts for Pregnancy Podcast listeners, and you can always see discounts and promo codes at pregnancypodcast.com/resources. When you're trying to get your baby to sleep, every little thing matters. The right sound, a soft light, the ability to soothe them without walking back into the room can all make a big difference. And a good baby monitor can actually help with that. The VTech VM5266 baby monitor is designed with sleep in mind. It has a 5-inch color LCD screen that lets you pan the camera 270 degrees, tilt and zoom all from the parent unit so you can check every corner of the room without opening the door. The baby unit has a touch adaptive multicolor nightlight, and there's a sound-activated soothing feature that automatically turns on the nightlight or projection when your baby stirs. You also get lullabies and ambient sounds, a 2-way talkback intercom, a temperature sensor, automatic infrared night vision, up to 1,000 feet of range, and 17 hours of battery life on the parent unit. This monitor is actually not Wi-Fi connected, which a lot of parents prefer for privacy and simplicity. VTech is the #1 baby monitor brand in North America and trusted by millions of families. The VTech VM5266 is available at Target. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/VTech. Let's get back to today's episode. Once you have the basics down, you should set a goal for how long you would like to breastfeed. Research shows that having a long-term breastfeeding plan is positively associated with breastfeeding self-efficacy. This is a goal that's not set in stone. You can adjust it, extend it, or decide to stop and supplement whenever that time is right for you and your baby. The point is that having a plan gives you an anchor that you can return to when breastfeeding feels uncertain or if you're running into issues. I know I've mentioned getting breastfeeding off to a good start. How you initiate breastfeeding is really important. Once your baby is born, you want to begin breastfeeding as soon as possible. You are 4 times more likely to perceive insufficient milk supply if you delay that first feeding. One of the best ways to get started is to be skin to skin with your baby right after birth. There's evidence that mothers who hold their newborn skin to skin show more confidence caring for their babies and breastfeed for longer. Newborns are really born with the instinct and the motivation to breastfeed. This is hardwired. So when they're placed skin to skin, a healthy baby can actually find the breast and self-attach without much help. Researchers have documented 9 different observable behaviors that lead to that first feeding. This is a sequence that's known as the breast crawl. And usually all of this unfolds within the first hour after birth. I hope that breastfeeding goes very smoothly for you, but there are issues that can come up that can affect supply. Breastfeeding takes practice and patience as you and your baby are finding your rhythm with it. Along the way, any issue that makes it harder to remove milk and anything that reduces milk removal can reduce your supply. Some problems show up in your breasts, like sore nipples, pain, vasospasms, plugged ducts, mastitis, engorgement. Others involve your baby, like them having jaundice, a tongue tie or a lip tie, food sensitivities, nursing strikes. And if your baby is having trouble latching, if they have a tongue tie or a lip tie, that can make their sucking really inefficient, which limits how much milk actually leaves your breasts. The good news here is that all of these problems usually have solutions. There is an entire episode on troubleshooting common breastfeeding issues that breaks all of these down and talks about the evidence along with tips to resolve them. So that's a good starting point to get educated. And a lactation consultant can help you pinpoint and fix an issue before it affects your supply. So if you're having any issues, don't just try to push through it. Make sure that you're addressing it. Now let's get into galactagogues and lactogenic foods. These are substances that are thought to increase milk supply. But before we get into these, I want you to remember the order of operations here. The first line of defense for making more milk is always frequent, effective milk removal. Medications, foods, herbs are all a second line of defense. There's no supplement that can make up for lack of milk removal. So keep that in mind, but let's take a look at what the evidence shows on galactagogues. First, there are prescription medications that doctors can sometimes use to treat lactation insufficiency. These are prescribed off-label, meaning that the drug was originally approved by the FDA for another condition. As with any medication, efficacy, risks, benefits all vary. A great resource for any medication while breastfeeding is the LactMed database. You can look up anything and find detailed information on safety during breastfeeding, links to a lot of studies so that you can make an informed decision. An in-depth review examined the efficacy and safety of pharmaceutical galactagogues. Most of the studies focused on the 2 most commonly used options, domperidone and metoclopramide. These are both gut motility drugs that happen to raise prolactin. That's the hormone behind milk production. Domperidone is sold under the brand name Motilium. This is considered a first-line option, but the FDA has not approved it for use in the United States. The other option is known by the brand name Reglan. This is available in the United States, but it does carry higher risks of side effects. According to LactMed, its clinical value for increasing milk supply is questionable. The review also looked at less common options. There are some antipsychotics like sulpiride that raise prolactin. These have occasionally been used off-label for supply, but typically not a real viable choice because of the side effects. This drug also not approved in the United States. evidence is pretty limited for other options like growth hormone, recombinant human prolactin, and thyrotropin releasing hormone. These remain largely more research curiosities than actual treatments that you would encounter in practice. There was a pilot study that looked at metformin that was investigated because insulin resistance and PCOS are linked to low supply, but unfortunately that did not turn up any compelling evidence to support the use of metformin either. So all of this to say there's really no ideal prescription drug for increasing supply, which takes us to natural remedies, foods, and herbs. So let's get into those. A lot of substances are thought to support milk supply. Some cultures have used these for centuries. An Australian study found that 60% of mothers used one or more galactagogues. Most commonly, lactation cookies were used by about 47%. About 32% used brewer's yeast, and 22% used fenugreek. Another study surveyed U.S. women who used galactagogues. Overall, participants felt that these helped increase their milk supply. Now, this result may partly reflect a placebo effect, meaning that mothers perceived more milk simply because they were taking something that they believed would work. But remember, your perceived milk supply is also important. Here's the challenge when you're looking at the research on this stuff. Studies on natural galactagogues tend to be very small, and they use different methods to measure outcomes. So when you're looking at the whole body of evidence, the results are very mixed. A Cochrane review that examined 27 studies comparing natural oral galactagogues with a placebo or with no treatment. This included banana flour, fennel, fenugreek, ginger, ixbat, Levant cotton, moringa, palm dates, and some other herbs. For each of these, the analysis showed either a possible benefit or little to no difference, and all of it was based on very low certainty evidence. There are a few specific things here that stood out. Moringa and mixed botanical tea may increase infant weight compared to placebo. The evidence on fennel and fenugreek was uncertain, and adverse effects were rarely reported for these things. And where they were, they involved only minor complaints. So on average, these studies included just 80 participants. Remember, I said that the research in this space tends to be very small studies. And that's part of the reason that the authors of this Cochrane review concluded that high-quality randomized controlled trials on galactagogues was urgently needed. One thing that you may have heard about to increase supply is lactation cookies. These are a popular way to combine several of these ingredients, and common recipes include oats, brewer's yeast, flaxseed, coconut oil, almond butter, and dates. The upside of lactation cookies is that these may offer other nutritional benefits like vitamins, minerals, iron, and healthy fats. The downside, though, is that there's not a lot of solid evidence that they actually increase supply. If you enjoy lactation cookies, you like baking, and you're not loading up on too much sugar, there's really little downside to trying this. When you weigh any intervention, you're looking at the risks and benefits. And with natural galactagogues, you may not have precise data on how well they work, but you can still weigh the possible upside against the risks. If you want to dig deeper into the potential effects of a specific herb, the LactMed database is an excellent resource. Again, this includes a summary of its use during lactation, how much of a substance actually transfers into your milk, the effects on breastfed infants, and the effects on your supply. I will link to all of the entries in LactMed for some of the most common galactagogues if you want to dig deeper into that. Again, going back to the research, there's not really solid evidence that there's anything on this list that you have to be taking that really makes a massive difference in your supply. On the opposite end of the spectrum of not making enough milk is oversupply. This may sound like a really good problem to have, but it can create big challenges for both you and your baby. Oversupply can cause a forceful letdown. That makes it hard for your baby to nurse comfortably. That basically means that your milk is coming out way too fast. This can leave your baby gulping, choking, pulling off the breast. Oversupply can also contribute to engorgement, plugged ducts, and mastitis. Kelly Mom has a really great in-depth article on forceful letdown and oversupply if you want to dig deeper into that. Many mothers who experience oversupply notice that it settles down around 3 months. If you find yourself in a position where you want to reduce your supply, that's a little bit of a balancing act because you don't want to overdo it and then create the opposite problem where you're not making enough milk. I will link to a Kelly Mom article that goes into a lot more detail on using herbs to reduce your milk supply, and a lactation consultant can be really invaluable for managing oversupply without tipping it too much so that you go into not making enough milk. There are some herbs that may lower your milk supply. I will list these in the article for this episode on the website, and for those that have an entry in the LactMed database, that will be linked. This includes things like black walnut, chickweed, lemon balm, oregano, parsley, peppermint, sage, spearmint, thyme. With these herbs, though, the dose matters. So I mentioned oregano. If you have a dish that's seasoned with oregano, that's very unlikely to change your supply. But you may want to stay clear of something that's super concentrated, like drinking oregano tea regularly. If you take one thing away from this episode, it's that milk removal always beats supplements. There's no pharmaceutical or herbal supplement that will make up for infrequent feedings. That said, if a supplement carries little or no risk and you're comfortable taking it, there's often no harm in trying. And always run any supplement by your doctor or midwife first. There's also a lot of popular products on the market that are aimed at supply, from lactation cookies to teas, cookie mixes, drink powders. Mother's milk tea is one of the most common. This is an herbal tea that typically blends galactagogue ingredients like fenugreek, fennel, anise, blessed thistle, and coriander. The evidence that it meaningfully increases your supply is really pretty thin, but it's low risk for most mothers. If you enjoy the taste of it, it's not causing any problems for you, there's no reason not to drink it. Worst case, you spent a little money on the tea that is helping you stay hydrated. If your doctor, midwife, or pediatrician raises a concern that you may not be making enough milk, talk it through. Ask what's driving that concern and what you can do to improve how much you're producing or to improve how much milk your baby is getting. If you want to keep breastfeeding, a lactation consultant is your best ally for resolving issues and for increasing your supply. And I know that hiring a lactation consultant sounds expensive. It may sound out of reach. A lot of this support you can find for free or low cost. Your insurance may cover lactation visits. Many hospitals run free breastfeeding support groups. Often there's a lactation consultant that leads that. La Leche League is also a fantastic resource. This is an organization of trained breastfeeding leaders that help answer questions. They have support groups all over the world. There's likely one in your city, and there is no cost to attend. Point being, you don't have to figure this out alone. If you're running into any issues, getting help early can make a big difference. To recap everything that we covered in today's episode, we talked about low supply, the difference between actual low supply and perceived milk insufficiency. We walked through how milk production works and why removal of milk is really what drives supply, and practical ways to establish your supply in the early weeks. We also talked about how you can gauge whether or not your baby's getting enough milk and went through all of the evidence on galactagogues. We talked about pharmaceutical options and the mixed research on foods and herbs that are thought to increase supply. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the Pregnancy Podcast today. I hope that you find this episode helpful. Please share the Pregnancy Podcast if you have a friend that's pregnant. So many listeners discover the podcast through recommendations, and I appreciate you sharing it. As always, you can reach me, Vanessa, at pregnancypodcast.com. You can see the full article and all of the resources for this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/milk supply. Milk supply is one topic where good information can make all the difference. If you're looking for more evidence-based information, check out Pregnancy Podcast Premium. You'll get access to hundreds of episodes that you won't find anywhere else. Plus, it's all ad-free and in your favorite podcast app. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/premium.